counted exactly how many there have been, but for months now I've been starting with shock saying, this is another one in the series of explorations of, you can call them different things, difficult emotions, destructive emotions, disturbing mind states. And this is the last one, so to speak. I mean, all of the Buddha Dhamma is about working with disturbing mind states, but this is kind of the last one. And it really, in it, I'll try to just touch on and summarize. Over the months that we've been exploring this together, I've really kind of taken little pieces, little threads, and I don't know that it's ever really gotten woven well together, but maybe I'll try to do that at some point. But it's sort of a combination of a lot of different threads kind of coming together. I think it's important to just understand that when we're working with difficult emotions, there really are thousands of skillful ways of doing it. So to kind of, imagine that there's a thing you could kind of come to and figure out and, put on the refrigerator as a refrigerator magnet, and then you know what to do, it doesn't work like that. Just as, anything, it's like how to raise children, or, how to have a happy marriage, or how to garden, how to grow tomatoes or something like that. There's some basic principles, but then there really is a key of just making it your own, and then, calling up the extension service when something happens with your tomatoes and you're not really quite sure. So really kind of having guides available who can help when you get really stuck or confused. So having said that, I wanted to talk about sort of three different dimensions of working with difficult emotions. One is what it means to be a wholesome or unwholesome emotion. The second is what unwholesome looks like and why. And then to spend just a little bit of time just pointing to some of the skillful means that we've talked about on and off over the months that we've been doing this. So the first part is, what is wholesome? With respect to emotion, there are many, many different, as I think I gave a whole talk on it, there are many, many different definitions of the term emotion. And so anytime you read anything about emotion, even in Buddhist texts, that you have to kind of get a sense of what it is they're talking about. Because it could be that they're talking about brain states or brain and body interaction. It could be that they're talking about mind states. There could be just sort of lots of different ways of thinking about emotion. And I read you a quote one time that even Western scientists who study emotion rather diligently, of the, I think it was 34 or 37 scientists who were surveyed, they couldn't come up with one single definition of the word emotion. So, whatever it is that you think of as emotion, the person next to you will think of it as something just slightly different. So to be aware of that whenever you're thinking about practicing with difficult emotion. So for our purposes tonight, here's the definition I'll work with. That destructive emotion or unwholesome emotion refers to mind states that combine with bodily arousal. This kind of bodily activation. So mind states that combine with bodily arousal to obscure the spacious awareness that is the fundamental nature that is inherent. The spacious awareness that is inherent in simply being. And it's inherent for you, and you, and you, and you, and you. It's inherent for each of us. This spacious, free awareness that is inherent in each of our being. And there are, so unwholesome emotion is something that obscures that spacious awareness. That clouds, it's sort of like, living forever in Seattle with clouds, that you forget that there's space, that there's sky. So unwholesome emotion is something that obscures that awareness. These obscurations cause us to tense and hold and contract, make ourselves small. I read you one time a poem from David White where he talks about anything or anyone who does not bring you alive is too small for you. And he's actually he's referring to that kind of spaciousness, that kind of really being just fully alive and fully here, fully present. He says anything and anyone that does not bring you alive in that way is too small for you. And so unwholesome emotion is something that obscures that spaciousness. And I use this gesture because it's something that contracts us. And we could kind of notice that, when you get really kind of cranky or, you think about, the political scene or something like that, and you have emotions about it. You can actually, even if I say the political scene, sometimes we can kind of, feel ourselves just get smaller, and then we start, and we kind of have, then we have like opinions with a capital O, and we can really feel that place where those obscurations really tend to constrict our minds and hearts, and make it difficult for us to be expanded and integrated. And the integration in our human life goes through many, many stages, this quality of integration. It can be integration with the mind, different aspects of the brain. It can be integration with the brain and the body. It can be integration in relationship, with, a sense of me and you, and we're both here, and it's, we're both okay. It can be a sense of kind of connecting to a whole tribe of people, a whole family of people, a whole tribe of people, and then integrating there, and then integrating even wider in having, integrations across tribes or across peoples, or, a sense of all of us. And that's just on the level of just ordinary human life, and then integration with all of that, with, if you will, the magic and the mystery of life. We've had some talks where we've pointed to the fact that even though, we think we're kind of smart as a human species, that actually we don't know very much. I quoted you some things from Niels Bohr, who is the Nobel Prize winning physicist, who, when he was being interviewed by someone one time who just kept asking him about, said, well, tell us about, the origins of the universe. And he would say, well, we don't know too much about that. And then she would say, well, okay, tell us about black holes, And he would say, well, we don't know too much about that either. That basically, even though we kind of have this sense that as human beings we have some kind of solidness and we kind of know where we are and we, can kind of navigate our world, the fact of the matter is that we actually know an excruciatingly tiny percentage of how this all works. How life and death works, and how the universe works, and how love works, and how, so that the integration, in our spiritual life really starts to move into that level of mystery, and where we can kind of rest in this larger, spacious awareness, where we can see the forms and we can see the humanness arise, but we don't take it quite so ultimately as some kind of, important reality. I was playing the other day with an awareness of this one right here, and just thinking, if I kind of expand my awareness to think about, this little Sharon in, Charlottesville, Virginia, and then, okay, how about if I kind of look at this little Sharon, from the perspective of the whole country, if I kind of get up in a spacecraft or something like that, or, but then, this little Sharon on this planet, which is, one little teensy planet in this solar system, which is one little teensy speck of this galaxy, which is one of billions of galaxies. So it's sort of like, well, really releasing into this much, much, much bigger mystery. So unwholesome emotion at any level, at any of those levels, whether it's my own integration just with this physical body or my integration with all that is, the ultimate integration, unwholesome emotion is an emotion that causes us to constrict and contract and basically live in Seattle all the time. And then I actually grew up in Rochester, New York, which was second only to Seattle in gray skies. The year that we left, the newspaper said it had a grand total of 64 days of sunshine the previous year. And when I first left and I came to Virginia, it was just such a shock that, it might rain in the morning, but then it would clear, that there actually was blue sky, and it was really quite remarkable. And destructive emotions are like that we live in the clouds, and we don't even know that there's more. And so our meditation practice is a practice of cultivating this capacity to live in a larger awareness. We talk about just being present, just seeing what's arising, seeing the breath arising, seeing body sensations arising, resting in awareness that isn't identified specifically with this, with this particular form. This is John McCransky. The fundamental nature of mind is our fundamental innate awareness. This pure awareness is the ground of all experience, all our thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. As such, it is naturally all-inclusive and wide open. Our dualistic thinking process tends to limit our attention to a very narrow sense of self as subject that seems to stand completely apart from others as an object. Yet our fundamental pure awareness, even as it gives rise to such dualistic thoughts, is a vast expanse of knowing that transcends all such limitations, unfettered by concepts, or by any sense that there is anything whatsoever that is to be excluded from our awareness, our love, and our care. So our spiritual practice really is about rediscovering, what is already immanent, what's already present. It's like me rediscovering living in Rochester under the clouds and rediscovering that there really is sky, and it's been there all along. It was only my misunderstanding that obscured that awareness. So cultivating that capacity. I've read to you also Thomas Merton's quote where he had a sudden awareness, where the clouds suddenly really parted. He says, "Then it was if I suddenly saw the secret beauty of their hearts." He's speaking about your heart, by the way. The depths of their hearts, where neither sin nor desire nor self-knowledge can reach. The core of their reality, the person that each one is in God's eyes. If only they could all see themselves as they really are. If only we could see each other that way all the time. So wholesome emotions are emotions that actually facilitate, at whatever level we are, whichever level of that awareness, that facilitate integration, that facilitate wholeness, that facilitate expansion and resting in larger spaces of consciousness. The obscurations, there are many, many different ways to think about obscurations. Fundamentally, and you've heard us speak of, the three poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion, they really kind of boil down to the obscurations of greed and hatred and delusion. And we talk about that a lot in a lot of different ways. We can wonder if any specific emotion is wholesome or not as it arises. It depends entirely on whether or not they are infused with greed, hatred, and delusion. And that's part of our practice of being able to discern, is there greed, hatred, and delusion here? Or is this something that's wholesome, that's really inviting expansion? Love, for example, can be both expansive, and it can also be an obscuration if the love is greedy, is like trying to control somebody. That kind of codependent love where it says, I love you so much that I'm going to hang on to you and make you a part of me in some way. So even the word love can be misunderstood and can actually be an obscuration. So whether or not any specific emotion is an obscuration depends on whether or not it obscures, whether or not it obscures that spacious awareness. Greed is a self-centered lust and grasping at happiness outside of ourselves. Hatred, the Buddha teaches that greed arises when one attends inappropriately to the pleasant. It's not about the pleasant being wrong, or even attending, or even delighting in the pleasant, but when one attends inappropriately to the pleasant. This is the Buddha. He says, for one who attends inappropriately to the theme of the attractive, unarisen passion arises, and arisen passion tends to grow in abundance. And we kind of know that place, don't we, where, that sense of, it isn't just like, I love chocolate or something like that, but that place where we really want to, knock everybody else out of the way to get that last piece of chocolate cake. However that greed arises. And that's a poison, that's an obscuration, that we're not going to get to spacious awareness if we inhabit that poison. Hatred, our aversion and repulsion, separation from, pushing away the unpleasant, whether it's unpleasant people, unpleasant circumstances, and even toward our own uncomfortable feelings, or even toward our own uncomfortable sense of self. Pushing away the unpleasant. And this is the Buddha again. He says, for one who attends inappropriately to the theme of irritation, unarisen aversion arises, and arisen aversion tends to growth and abundance. So attending inappropriately to the unpleasant, that place where we say, whatever it is, the telemarketer who calls, the computer that fails, whatever it is, the political circumstances that aren't to our liking, whenever one attends inappropriately, so that the passion, if you will, of aversion arises or is maintained. It's a cloud. It's not going to really lead us to ultimate happiness. And delusion, our dullness, bewilderment, misunderstanding, and misperception about what is real. We spent some time especially when we did the Eightfold Path, talking about wisdom and the cultivation of wisdom, really understanding what's true, what's real, and what's not real, what's just a figment, if you will, of our imagination. And for one who attends inappropriately, the Buddha says, unarisen delusion arises. So it's really, he says, unarisen ignorance, where we don't understand how things work. It's that place where we get a new gizmo of some sort, and they forgot the instructions. We don't understand how things work. And the Buddha is saying that in our lives, we don't understand how things work. And that's ignorance, that's delusion, where we don't understand how, what's the basis of our happiness. This is the Dalai Lama. If we look at the list of 51 mental factors, there are lists of 51, there are lists of 3, there are lists of 12, there are lists of 184. He's talking about the list of 51, whatever the 51 factors are. He said there are some known as the variable or changeable factors because other conditions make them either positive or negative, constructive or destructive. On that list could be fear, sadness, and many other emotions, which we cannot say categorically are constructive or destructive. So again, the inquiry for each of us individually is the extent to which greed, hatred, or delusion are present. This is Matthew Ricard, a Buddhist monk. He says, one would call emotion something that conditions the mind and makes it adopt a certain perspective or vision of things. How, from the Buddhist point of view, does one distinguish between constructive and destructive emotions? Fundamentally, a destructive emotion, which is also referred to as an obscuring or afflictive mental factor, is something that prevents the mind from ascertaining reality as it is. With a destructive emotion, there will always be a gap between the way things appear and the way things are. Thus, they impair one's judgment. Eventually, it also obscures a deeper assessment of the nature of things as being permanent or impermanent, as having intrinsic properties or not. Thus, obscuring emotions impair one's freedom by chaining thoughts in a way that compels us to think, speak, and act in a biased way. Together, thoughts and compelling, I wrote that down wrong, prevent one from seeing things as they are. Actions are not good or bad in themselves, but whether they lead to happiness or suffering for self or others. So again, it's an art of really inquiry, not like there's this thing that is necessarily good or not so good, but it's a real inquiry of these mind states that arise. Do they lead to suffering? Do they lead to the spacious awareness, or do they lead to obscurations or constrictions in my mind and heart? And the Buddha discovered that when suffering arises, that there is this constriction. And so then suffering becomes the clue. If I'm finding myself suffering about anything, it could be suffering about the outcome of, I'm aware of it tonight, I watched the nominating process tonight before I came. It could be about the political process. If there's suffering, then it's a nice invitation to look and see where am I contracting, what am I clinging to, what's driving this. If there's suffering about a relationship or, quality of myself. If there's some inability to kind of see it from, if you will, outer space, that quality of just seeing it. Yeah, it's there, so that, those Martians who are looking down at us right now, they might see Sharon and her foibles and virtues, but it really isn't such a big deal. That there's a much larger awareness in which the specific arises. So the invitation of our practice is to train our minds to attend to objects, to attend to what arises in the mind, whether it's agreeable and disagreeable, to attend in ways that open into the deep peace and happiness. This is what our spiritual practice offers as a fundamental birthright. Really. A fundamental birthright, and it's why we practice. It's why we do this rather foolish thing of sitting and, watching our body sensations or our breath. Why would we do that? But to cultivate this capacity to simply be aware of what's arising without it driving us, without it pushing and pulling us into all sorts of unskillful actions. So we use the teachings to help us develop our own personal fluency with these disturbing objects, with the difficult, disturbing, even destructive emotions that arise for all of us on this human journey. So we must each make this path our own as we practice it. What's needed here? Where do I get lost? Where do I lose my balance? The title of the talks, the series of talks, is Becoming Fluent with Life. Where do I become not so fluent and get kind of rigid and tight? And can I really inquire right there into what it is that, that's clouding this luminous mind and heart that Thomas Merton speaks of, that is our birthright. And we've talked a bit in different ways about working with difficult emotion, and I'm just going to touch on them just so briefly tonight. There are sort of, well, I was going to say three, but there are all sorts of different ways. Three major categories. But again, remember, it's sort of like, if you're going to be an artist, you could know that there are paints or there are colors, there are primary colors that are your tools, and there might be a paintbrush or a canvas. But in terms of what you inquire into or how you use those tools, it's really very personal. So working with destructive and obscuring emotions is also very personal. And it isn't necessarily that what I need to do today is the same as what I needed to do yesterday or tomorrow. So it's always this kind of ongoing inquiry. I seem to be sitting under a cloud, like, was it Eeyore? I seem to be sitting under a cloud. What is this? What's happening for me? What's keeping me kind of constricted? So there are sort of three different categories I wanted to just touch on and point to. One is just abandoning. That when we find ourselves caught in destructive emotion, or acting or speaking on the basis of destructive emotion, we can really simply let awareness know that. And in the Dalai Lama's words, don't do that. I heard him say that to somebody one time. He said, that's wrong, don't do that. But it's sort of like, I'm going to keep using forgive me, I'm going to keep using the political scene right now, because we can find ourselves speaking and acting in ways that really aren't going to get they're just not going to be to anyone's benefit. And the first instruction is abandon. See that. It isn't like you're a bad person when it happens. So now I could, really do something destructive out there, but then I could also do something destructive by adding a layer of judgment and recrimination internally. And then I could say, well, that's not really very spiritual, and so I could have a layer of judgment and recrimination about having a layer of judgment. It could go on for a really long time. And the invitation is when we see ourselves doing that, in the Dalai Lama's wise guidance, that we follow his guidance. We just say, don't do that. It's not going to help. It's not going to help you. It's not going to contribute to your happiness, and it's not going to contribute to the happiness of the world. And we've spoken, not too long ago, we really spoke a good bit, and there was a whole precepts class about sila, about really cultivating wholesome behaviors and responses, both externally and internally, being kind. The second major category is recognizing and accepting these difficult mind states. That we've talked a number of different ways about rain, where we recognize this mind state as it arises in the body. In the body, 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 in the body. As it arises in the body, we cultivate the capacity to accept and allow the awareness and this experience to be there. Because without allowing it to be there, there's no way we're going to develop any kind of wisdom about what is this and what's needed. So it isn't like we allow it to be there like, okay, I feel this hatred and so now I'm going to indulge it forever. But we allow it to be there so we can investigate it. That's the eye of rain. So we can look and see what might be needed. An N of rain, and we actually did spend some time on this too, of not self, which is basically understanding that we don't need to take this human life so personally. And that whatever is arising for us, the issue isn't, why it's there or whether, any of that. The issue really is what's needed here now. How can I be wholesome here, now, with this? And not contribute to my own suffering or the suffering of the world. So here there's a crucial component of just the ability to reflect and to see our experience. And as we do, we can maybe become aware of long-standing habits of rumination or obsession or just unskillfulness, just with respect to the awareness of our own experience. And then the cultivation along the lines of the Dalai Lama, again, when we see ourselves ruminating or obsessing or indulging in self-criticism, where the Dalai Lama might say, don't do that. In fact, I think that was exactly the circumstance that he was responding to someone about, where someone was talking about criticizing himself, and he just kind of burst forward. He said, don't do that. That's just not wholesome. That's not helpful. So we can see some long-standing habits of destructive emotion, some long-standing habits of rumination or self-criticism. And the invitation is to work. Hugh Byrne came one night and he talked to us about just really working to really release some of these old habits when we see that they're not wholesome, they're not skillful. And here with rain, we wonder, should we just notice? Should we try to change something? Should we take medication? Should we do psychotherapy? Should we work with somebody else? Meditate more, meditate less. I've been known to recommend that people meditate less or meditate differently. What should we do? And there again, it's part of the art of the inquiry, of really looking to see what's needed. And try to approach those questions with a non-dualistic mind, the middle way, not too tight, not too loose. Letting go of any fundamentalist thinking that says this and only this is the right way. And then the third general area, and actually I spent a long series, before I even started talking about difficult emotions, I had a long series talking about cultivating happiness in the wholesome. So the third general area is really cultivating the wholesome, which is what Bhikkhu Bodhi calls sturdy support for working with the difficult. Cultivating the antidote to overcome greed. We learn to cultivate selflessness, generosity, gratitude, detachment, curiosity, wholesome mind states that are like, wholesome spaces. The antidote to overcome hatred, we learn to cultivate kindness, compassion, patience, forgiveness. The antidote to overcome delusion, we cultivate wisdom, insight, and right understanding. We learn basically how to set up a tent in a hurricane. Marshall Lenihan has that sense of working with difficult emotions. Well, that might be a really nice place to stop because I see Foster and Chris standing there, and we wanted to take some moments and acknowledge, not even cultivate because it's just there, acknowledge the gratitude and goodness. So, Foster, we wanted to come and say welcome. Yeah, this is Foster. You've seen him.